You already know the moment. You are at checkout. The ticket said $90. Now it says $127. Service fee, facility charge, order processing fee. You have about 8 seconds before the card expires. You click confirm. Not because any of this feels right, because there is no other option. There has never been another option. You just did not know who designed it that way, or when the government decided that was acceptable. What you felt in that moment is not a side effect of the live music industry. It is the product. The company that engineered that checkout screen, that fee structure, and that absence of alternatives is not just a ticketing platform. It is the same company that owns the venue you are going to, promoted the artist you are seeing, and may manage the career of the person performing. This channel investigates the systems that operate inside industries everyone thinks they understand. The ones that look completely normal on the surface. If that is your kind of thing, subscribe before we go further. In May 2024, the Department of Justice confirmed what you already suspected. They filed a federal antitrust lawsuit against Live Nation Entertainment, the parent company of Ticketmaster, alleging illegal monopoly. The government had already approved this company's formation, monitored its behavior, found 7 documented violations of its own conditions, and done nothing. In 2024, it filed the lawsuit it should have filed in 2010. Here is what you are about to understand. One company controls the venues where artists perform. It controls the companies that manage those artists. And it controls the platform that sells every ticket to every show in every one of those venues. If you want to see live music at scale in the United States, there is no alternative. There has not been one since 2010. And the government that was supposed to prevent this approved it, monitored it, found violations, and did nothing. There is one clause inside artist contracts with Live Nation that the company has never made public. We will get to it. And when we do paid the last list for it. In 2023, Live Nation collected for $0.6 billion in fees, not in ticket sales. In fees alone. That number is inside their public quarterly report, buried under ancillary revenue. It grew 34% that year. Ticket sales grew 8%. The fee is not a side effect of the business. The fee is the business. This is not a story about greedy corporations. Greed does not require an investigation. This is a story about what happens when a market has no competition. A government approves the merger that kills it. And the machine runs for 14 years without a single meaningful consequence. By the end of this section, you will understand that the monopoly did not start in 2010. It was already built before most. People watching this were old enough to buy a ticket. Ticketmaster was founded in 1976 in Phoenix, Arizona by 2 software engineers named Albert Loeffler and Gordon Gunn. The original idea was straightforward. Concert venues at the time sold tickets manually through box offices, with no real system for tracking inventory or managing demand. Loeffler and Gunn built a computerized alternative. It was faster, more accurate, and could process transactions from multiple locations simultaneously. For the first few years, the company was a convenience, a useful tool in an industry that had not yet figured out scale. The problem with useful tools is that they become infrastructure. And infrastructure, in any market, is where power concentrates. By the early 1980s, Ticketmaster had expanded into major cities across the country. Its model was simple. It charged a service fee on top of the face value of the ticket. A portion of that fee went to the venue as a kickback for using the platform exclusively. This exclusivity was the critical detail. Not we prefer Ticketmaster. We use Ticketmaster and no one else. Every venue that signed an exclusive contract became a wall. As more walls went up, The space available for any competing ticketing company shrank. By 1991, a study cited in congressional testimony found that Ticketmaster controlled approximately 80% of the major concert venue ticketing market in the United States. The company had not acquired its competitors. It had made them irrelevant by locking up the venues. They needed to survive. This happened before any merger, before Live Nation existed, and before the government had a formal reason to investigate. The service fee that felt arbitrary to consumers was not arbitrary at all. It was a structural mechanism. Venues agreed to exclusivity in exchange for a share of every fee charged on every ticket sold. That arrangement aligned the financial interest of the venue directly with the financial interest of Ticketmaster. The more fees charged, the more both parties earned. The consumer had no seat at that negotiation. In 1993, MCA Inc. acquired Ticketmaster for $325 million. 2 years later, Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, acquired the company from MCA. The ownership changed. The model did not. And then, in 1994, a band decided to fight it. A band that was, at that moment, one of the most popular in the world. They had the resources, the public platform, and the legal team to take on the largest ticketing company in the country. They filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. They testified before Congress. They attempted to organize a tour that bypassed Ticketmaster entirely. They lost, not because their argument was wrong, because the structure they were fighting was already too embedded to remove. The venues had signed exclusive contracts. Alternative venues were too small to support a full national tour. The walls were already up. What happened to that band in 1994 will happen again before this video ends. The names will be different. The outcome will be the same. You will understand exactly how a government agency approved something it knew was dangerous, under conditions it never enforced. Live Nation was formed as a spin-off from Clear Channel Communications. Its business was concert promotion. It organized tours, booked venues, handled marketing, and managed relationships with artists. It was, effectively, the company that decided which artists went on the road, where they performed, and under what financial terms. Ticketmaster, by 2009, had been acquired by IAC and then spun off as an independent company. Its business was the transaction layer, the platform through which consumers bought tickets to the shows that Live Nation promoted, in the venues that Live Nation increasingly controlled, to companies. One controlled the supply, one controlled the access point. When they announced a merger in 2009, the concern was immediate and obvious. The Department of Justice opened an antitrust investigation. Advocacy groups, artists, and competing companies argued that the combination would give a single entity control over the entire live music ecosystem. The DOJ agreed, in principle, with the concern, and then it approved the merger anyway. The conditions attached to the approval were specific. Live Nation was required to license its ticketing software to a competitor, to divest certain venue contracts, and to establish internal firewalls preventing the company from using its venue. Control to pressure artists into using Ticketmaster, 25 conditions in total. The merger was approved in January 2010. There is a part of this story most people never hear about. Is cheeky around. By 2019, a review conducted by the DOJ Antitrust Division found that Live Nation had violated the terms of its merger approval at least 7 times. The company had used its control of venues to pressure artists and promoters into using Ticketmaster. In one documented case, a Live Nation executive sent a message to a promoter warning that future bookings at Live Nation venues might be affected if the promoter used a competing ticket platform. The DOJ characterized this as retaliatory behavior, which violated the consent decree the company had signed. The penalty a 5-year extension of the consent decree. No fine, no structural remedy, no executive accountability. The company paid nothing and changed nothing. The decree that was supposed to constrain the merger was extended, not enforced. By 2024, that extended consent decree had expired, and the DOJ filed the lawsuit that opened this investigation. The merger of 2010 was not a failure of foresight. The DOJ saw the risk. It named it in its own documentation. What followed was not an accident of regulatory oversight. It was a choice, repeated multiple times over 14 years, to prioritize stability over competition. By the end of this section, you will understand why the phrase service fee is not a description of a service. It is a description of a position of power. Vertical integration is a business concept with a simple definition and a complicated history. When a company controls multiple stages of the same supply chain, it is vertically integrated. The classic textbook example is a company that owns the farm, the factory, and the store. No stage depends on an outside party. Every margin stays inside the system. Live Nation Entertainment, as it exists today, is vertically integrated across every stage of the live music supply chain. It controls the venues where performances happen through its artist management divisions, which include companies acquired over the past decade. It represents many of the artists performing in those venues. And through Ticketmaster, it controls the platform that sells every ticket to every performance. According to a 2023 analysis cited in the DOJ lawsuit filing, Live Nation operates or controls approximately 265 of the 300 largest entertainment venues in the United States. That number includes arenas, amphitheaters, and stadiums that represent the only viable option for major touring artists. An artist who wants to perform for 20,000 people in Los Angeles, Chicago, or Atlanta is not choosing between venues. The choice has already been made. The clause in artist contracts that we mentioned at the opening of this investigation appears here. It is called a venue exclusivity clause. When an artist signs with a Live Nation promoter, a standard provision in the contract specifies that performances at Live Nation-controlled venues will be ticketed through Ticketmaster. The artist does not negotiate this clause. It is presented as a condition of accessing the venue. Because Live Nation controls the venue, it controls the ticket platform. And because it controls the ticket platform, it controls the fee structure that the consumer ultimately pays. That fee structure has a name the industry uses internally: drip pricing. The face value of the ticket is the number that appears in the advertisement and in the artist's promotional material. The service fees, the facility charges, the order processing fees, and the delivery fees appear only at checkout, after the consumer has already committed emotionally to the purchase. According to a 2023 Federal Trade Commission analysis of ticketing industry practices, the average service fee charged on a major concert ticket represents approximately 27% of the face value on a $100 ticket. That is $27 added at checkout. On a $200 ticket, it is $54. The FTC report also documented that a portion of these fees is shared back with the venue as part of the exclusivity agreement. The venue earns more when the fee is higher. Its financial interest is aligned directly with Ticketmaster's. The consumer's interest is not represented at any point in this structure. An artist who attempts to use a competing ticket platform faces a specific consequence. If the venue is controlled by Live Nation, the competing platform cannot access it. The artist must choose between their preferred ticket platform and access to the venues where their audience actually goes. Pearl Jam made this choice in 1994 and lost access to most major markets for an entire tour. The band that tried to route around the system became a case study in why the system does not route around. The vertical trap does not require the appearance of coercion. It operates through the structure of the market itself. When one company controls the venue, the promotion, and the transaction platform, the alternative is not to use a different company. The alternative is to play in smaller venues, reach fewer people, and accept that the system will be there when the artist is ready to come back. Most artists come back. The machine runs on that calculation. This is not a Taylor Swift story. It is the story of what happens when a monopoly finally has to answer questions in public. On November 15th, 2022, Ticketmaster opened a pre-sale for the Eras Tour, Taylor Swift's first concert tour in 5 years. The demand was unprecedented by any reasonable measure. Ticketmaster had announced a verified fan system designed to limit bots and ensure that actual fans received tickets. 14 million people registered for the pre-sale. Ticketmaster approved 1.5 million of them. Within hours of the pre-sale opening, the platform collapsed. Fans who had received pre-sale codes were locked out. Error messages replaced checkout screens. Tickets that had been added to carts disappeared. Ticketmaster's queue system generated wait times that changed arbitrarily, sometimes growing longer while users waited. Millions of people sat in front of screens for hours and left with nothing. Ticketmaster issued a statement attributing the failure to unprecedented demand and ticket bot attacks. The general sale, scheduled for the following day, was canceled entirely. What followed was unlike anything the live entertainment industry had seen in decades. State attorneys general announced investigations. Congress scheduled hearings. Senators who had never previously expressed interest in ticketing infrastructure gave televised statements about market power and consumer protection. And for the first time in the 14 years since the merger, the phrase live nation monopoly appeared in mainstream news coverage at scale. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing in January 2023 produced several hours of testimony from Live Nation's president, Joe Berchtold. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota asked Berchtold directly whether the company was a monopoly. Berchtold said it was not. Klobuchar cited the DOJ's own merger conditions and the 2019 consent decree violations. Berchtold said the company had taken the violations seriously. In 1994, a guitarist from Pearl Jam sat in a similar room and made a similar argument. The committee listened. The DOJ investigated. 18 months later, the investigation was closed without action. Pearl Jam spent 2 years attempting to build a tour infrastructure that did not require Ticketmaster. They partnered with smaller venues, worked with independent promoters, and kept ticket prices artificially low to demonstrate that the system could function without the dominant platform. They lost money on the tour. They returned to Ticketmaster-controlled venues for the next tour. The structural reality of the market absorbed the protest and continued operating. The difference between 1994 and 2022 is not the scale of the argument. It is the scale of the audience. When 14 million people experience the same failure on the same day, the political calculation changes. The DOJ filed its antitrust lawsuit against Live Nation in May 2024. It is the most serious legal challenge the company has faced since its formation. Whether it produces a different outcome than 1994 is a question we will return to. By the end of this section, you will understand not just what Live Nation is, but what kind of thing it is, and why that kind is almost impossible to undo. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller controlled approximately 4% of the United States' oil refining capacity. By 1880, he controlled 90%. He did not achieve this through superior oil extraction. He achieved it through control of the infrastructure that oil depended on. He negotiated secret rebates with railroads that transported oil. His competitors paid the public rate. He pays. Over time, The cost difference made his refineries more profitable, which gave him capital to acquire competitors, which gave him more leverage with railroads, which reduced his costs further. The loop was self-reinforcing. Once a certain threshold of market control was reached, the structure became difficult to reverse without dismantling the infrastructure itself. The government ultimately did dismantle it in 1911 through a Supreme Court ruling that broke Standard Oil into 34 separate companies. It took for decades of accumulation and a decade of legal process to undo what Rockefeller had built in 10 years. Economists have a term for what Rockefeller was extracting: economic rent, not rent in the residential sense. Rent in the sense of income derived from controlling a scarce resource rather than from producing something. A landlord who owns the only bridge across a river does not need to improve the bridge to increase revenue. The bridge's value comes from its position, not its quality. As long as people need to cross the river, the landlord earns from the crossing. Live Nation does not produce music. It controls the infrastructure that music depends on. The venues, the promotion networks, the ticketing platform. Like Rockefeller's railroads, these are the bridge. The fee is the toll. The economic term for Live Nation's structure is vertical monopoly. A company achieves vertical monopoly when it controls enough sequential stages of a supply chain to extract rent from participants at every stage simultaneously. The artist pays through unfavorable contract terms and mandatory platform usage. The venue pays through exclusivity agreements that limit its negotiating options. The consumer pays through drip pricing that is only visible at the moment of no return. 3 separate populations, all paying rent to the same bridge. There is a number inside Live Nation's quarterly reports that the company does not put in the headline of its earnings calls. We will get to it in the next section. But it is worth noting now that the financial structure of the company reflects this model precisely. Revenue from the music itself, the ticket face value, represents a smaller share of total earnings than revenue from fees, management commissions, and venue operations combined. The concert is the reason people show up. The machine around the concert is where the money is. The critical feature of this model is that every participant in the system has a financial interest in its continuation, except the consumer. The artist needs the venue. The venue needs the audience. The audience has no alternative platform. Each party's dependence on the next creates a chain of incentives that holds the structure in place, even when individual participants would prefer a different arrangement. Pearl Jam preferred a different arrangement in 1994. The market structure was stronger than the preference. This is not unique to music. The same architecture appears in industries that use different language to describe the same relationship. Understanding the pattern requires a brief look at what the same machine looks like in contexts where the music is not playing. By the end of this section, you will recognize this structure the next time you encounter it, regardless of what it is selling. Amazon Marketplace, as most consumers understand it, is a platform where independent sellers list products and consumers buy them. The reality of the structure is different. Amazon controls the search algorithm that determines which products appear first. It operates a fulfillment network, called FBA, that sellers are strongly incentivized to use in order to qualify for prime shipping. It operates its own private label brands that compete directly with the independent sellers using its platform. And it uses data from those sellers' transactions to inform the pricing and development of its own competing products. The independent seller pays a listing fee, a fulfillment fee, an advertising fee to appear in search results, and a referral fee on every sale. In 2022, according to an analysis by Marketplace Pulse, the average Amazon third-party seller paid approximately 34% of their revenue to Amazon in fees and advertising costs. The fee structure is invisible to the consumer. The price on the listing appears to be what the seller is charging. The margin between that price and what the seller actually receives is occupied by Amazon's infrastructure. This is the same architecture. A company that controls the platform, the logistics, and increasingly the product itself, extracting a percentage from every transaction that passes through its system. Comcast controls the cable infrastructure in large portions of the United States through regional monopoly arrangements that prevent competing providers from laying alternative networks in the same areas. It also produces content through NBC Universal. A consumer in a Comcast territory who wants broadband internet, cable television, and streaming access to NBC content has limited ability to separate these services or source them independently. In music streaming, 3 companies, Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Warner Music Group, collectively control the rights to approximately 80% of commercially released, recorded music. According to a 2023 report by MyDA Research, these same companies have equity stakes and licensing agreements with the major streaming platforms. A streaming platform that fails to reach agreement with any one of the 3 majors loses access to the majority of commercially viable music. The negotiating position of the platform is structurally limited before the negotiation begins. Live Nation sits at the intersection of the physical and digital music economy. It controls the venues where artists perform in person. Through its artist management companies, it controls the career decisions of many of those artists. And through Ticketmaster, it controls the transaction layer for every physical ticket sold at those venues. The pattern is the infrastructure controlling the transaction. In transportation, this is the airport controlling the gate and the airline controlling the seat. In healthcare, this is the hospital system controlling the physician group and the insurance plan. In live music is Live Nation controlling the venue, the artist, and the ticket. The consumer at the end of each chain pays a fee. The fee is called something different in each industry. The function is the same. The person who pays the highest price for this structure is not you. It is the artist you paid to see. Between 2019 and 2023, the number of independent music venues in the United States fell by approximately 25%, according to data published by the National Independent Venue Association. NIVA documented the closures during the COVID-19 pandemic and in the years immediately following. The pandemic was the proximate cause. The structural context matters. Independent venues operate without the financial backing of a parent company. They cannot absorb extended periods of zero revenue the way a corporation with $22 billion in annual revenue can. They do not have access to the favorable lending terms that large corporations receive. When the pandemic closed venues for 18 months, independent operators had no alternative income stream. Live Nation suspended operations temporarily, then resumed with its infrastructure intact and its venue contracts unaffected. The venues that closed were predominantly the ones competing with it. For artists who perform at Live Nation venues, the financial structure of the engagement reflects the company's market position. According to reporting by the Los Angeles Times and independent industry analyses, artists performing at Live Nation-controlled amphitheaters and arenas typically receive between 12 and 15% of the gross ticket revenue after fees. The remaining 85 to 88% is distributed among the promoter, the venue, and Ticketmaster's fee collection. The percentages vary by contract. The general structure does not. An artist performing to 20,000 people at a ticket price of $100 generates $2 million in gross revenue. Under the typical structure, that artist receives between $240,000 and $300,000. Ticketmaster collects approximately $540,000 in fees from consumers on top of that face value. The company that owns the venue promotes the show, manages the artist, and sells the ticket earns from every layer of that transaction simultaneously. Independent artists, independent venues, and consumers are not in the same category of impact. But they share a common feature. Their position in the market is determined by a structure they did not design and cannot individually change. The concert, the ticket, and the experience of live music all continue. The terms under which they continue are set by a single entity. This structure did not appear suddenly. It was built incrementally over decades. And its most important precedent is a congressional hearing from 1994 that most people have never heard of. What happened in 1994 tells you exactly what is going to happen with the current DOJ case, and whether anything will actually change. In May 1994, Pearl Jam filed a complaint with the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, alleging that Ticketmaster was engaging in anti-competitive practices. The specific allegation was that Ticketmaster's exclusive contracts with major venues effectively prevented any competing ticketing company from operating in the same market. The band's argument was supported by their own experience attempting to plan a summer tour with capped ticket prices at $18 per ticket. Ticketmaster's standard service fees at the time would have added between $3 and $5 to that price, which the band considered inconsistent with their stated commitment to affordable access for fans. When they approached Ticketmaster about reducing or eliminating the service fee for their shows, the company declined. Pearl Jam then attempted to route their tour through venues that did not have exclusive contracts with Ticketmaster. What they found, as documented in their congressional testimony, was that the venues available to them without Ticketmaster were significantly smaller, geographically limited, and in many cases technically inadequate for a major tour production. The band performed a partial tour through alternative venues, but was effectively excluded from the major markets where Ticketmaster-exclusive venues were the only viable option. The DOJ investigation opened and ran for approximately 18 months. During that period, Pearl Jam's guitarist Mike McCready testified before the House of Representatives about the band's experience. The testimony was detailed, specific, and documented with internal correspondence between band representatives and venue managers. In July 1995, the DOJ closed the investigation without taking action. The official reason given was insufficient evidence of anti-competitive behavior. The investigation had found that Ticketmaster held exclusive contracts with a significant majority of major venues. It found that these contracts prevented competing platforms from accessing those venues. It found that artists attempting to use alternative platforms faced practical exclusion from major markets. It closed without consequence. The clause in artist contracts that this investigation mentioned at the opening is the exclusivity provision that appeared in Pearl Jam's venue negotiations in 1994. It exists in functionally identical form in Live Nation contracts today. The language has been updated. The mechanism is the same. A congressional committee heard about it 30 years ago. A federal agency investigated it and found it insufficient to act on. It is now the subject of a new federal lawsuit. The 1994 investigation is not a historical footnote. It is a blueprint. The arguments are identical. The evidence is more extensive. The legal framework is the same. What is different is the political visibility of the issue and the scale of the public event that made it impossible for the government to decline to act a second time. Whether the outcome is different is a question the numbers inside Live Nation's own reporting can help answer. By the end of this section, you will understand that the concert ticket is not Live Nation's product. The fee is. Live Nation Entertainment reported total revenue of $22.7 billion in 2023. According to its annual report filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, that number is the headline figure in every earnings report and investor presentation the company produces. It is the number that reflects the scale of the live music business. The number they do not headline is the breakdown. Of the $22.7 billion in total revenue, approximately $4.6 billion came from what Live Nation classifies as ancillary revenue. This category includes service fees, facility charges, order processing fees, and the various line items that appear at the checkout screen of a Ticketmaster transaction after the face value of the ticket has already been displayed. It also includes revenue from Ticketmaster's secondary market operations, where tickets purchased in the primary sale are resold at market rates through platforms that Live Nation controls. In 2022, that ancillary revenue figure was approximately $3.4 billion. The increase to $4.6 billion represents a 34% year-over-year growth. During the same period, revenue from ticket face value grew approximately 8%. The fee grew more than 4 times faster than the ticket. This is the number that explains the business model. A company that earns more from the transaction infrastructure than from the events being transacted is not in the business of producing entertainment. It is in the business of owning the pipe through which entertainment passes. The concert is the reason consumers enter the system. The fee is the reason the system exists. The secondary market operation adds another layer. When a ticket purchased in the primary sale is resold on a platform like Ticketmaster, Fan-to-Fan Exchange, or Ticket Exchange, Live Nation collects a fee from both the seller and the buyer. The company earns from the original transaction and from every subsequent transaction involving the same ticket. A ticket that is resold 3 times generates for separate fee events for Live Nation, 1 primary, 3 secondary. The DOJ lawsuit filed in 2024 specifically addresses the secondary market as part of the antitrust allegation. The complaint argues that Live Nation has used its control of primary market infrastructure to direct consumers toward its own secondary market platforms, preventing competing resale platforms from developing meaningful market share. The secondary market, globally, was valued at approximately $15 billion in 2023 by market research firm IBIS World. In its earnings call following the 23 annual report, Live Nation's management characterized the growth in ancillary revenue as a reflection of enhanced fan experiences and premium product offerings. The Federal Trade Commission's 2023 report on live event ticketing characterized the same fees as hidden charges that appear only at checkout after consumers have made a purchase decision based on an advertised price that does not reflect the total cost. The characterization gap between these two descriptions is where the antitrust argument lives. You will understand not just what might happen next, but what the structure of this industry tells us will happen, regardless of the legal outcome. The Department of Justice antitrust lawsuit filed in May 2024 is, in legal terms, a structural remedy case. The government is not alleging that Live Nation engaged in criminal behavior. It is alleging that the structure of the company, its simultaneous control of venues, promotion, and ticketing constitutes an illegal monopoly under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The proposed remedy, as indicated in the complaint, is divestiture, specifically the separation of Ticketmaster from the rest of Live Nation Entertainment. If the DOJ prevails, Ticketmaster would become an independent company, separate from Live Nation's venue and promotion operations. The two businesses would no longer share a corporate parent, and the internal arrangement that allows venue exclusivity contracts to mandate Ticketmaster usage would, in theory, be severed. There are 2 things this remedy does not address. First, it does not change the number of venues Live Nation controls. A divested Ticketmaster would still face a market in which Live Nation operates 265 of the 300 largest venues in the country. Second, it does not address the secondary market. The DOJ complaint focuses primarily on the primary sale. The secondary market operations are referenced but not specifically addressed in the structural remedy proposal. The 1982 breakup of AT&T is the most commonly cited precedent for what structural divestiture can accomplish. AT&T was broken into 8 regional operating companies called Baby Bells, plus a long-distance division. The intent was to introduce competition at the regional level. What followed over the next 2 decades was a series of remergers that reconstituted most of the original structure. By 2005, 2 of the Baby Bells had recombined under the AT&T name and acquired most of the other regional companies. The structure that was broken apart in 1982 had largely reformed by 2006. Live Nation's management, in public statements following the DOJ lawsuit, has argued that the company's scale benefits consumers by organizing concerts more efficiently than a fragmented market could. This argument has a structural problem. The consumer in the Live Nation market has no counterfactual. There is no alternative market to compare the experience against, because Live Nation's market position prevents one from existing. The machine does not need to defend its efficiency. It only needs to survive the legal process long enough for the political pressure that created the lawsuit to dissipate. In 1994, the political pressure was Pearl Jam and a congressional hearing. The pressure dissipated. In 2022 and 2023, the political pressure was the Eras Tour, Senate hearings, and 14 state attorney general investigations. Whether that pressure sustains through a multi-year antitrust case is the question on which the outcome depends. In May 2024, the Department of Justice sued Live Nation for the same reason the Department of Justice investigated Ticketmaster in 1994. The market structure had produced an outcome that regulators could not publicly ignore. The political environment made inaction difficult, and the legal argument under both antitrust frameworks was substantively similar. In 1995, the investigation closed without action. In 2024, a lawsuit was filed. The difference is scale, not structure. The question this investigation set out to answer is not whether Live Nation is a monopoly. The company's own financials answer that. The fee revenue that grew 34% while ticket revenue grew 8% describes a business that earns more from controlling a transaction than from enabling the event being transacted. A company that earns $4.6 billion from fees on $22.7 billion in total revenue is not supplementing its entertainment business with ancillary charges. It is running an infrastructure, extraction business that uses entertainment as its distribution mechanism. Pearl Jam found the exclusivity clause in artist contracts in 1994 and brought it to Congress. Congress held hearings. The DOJ investigated. Nothing changed. The clause is still in the contracts. The exclusivity is still in the venue agreements. The fee is still added at checkout after the consumer has decided to buy. The machine runs on the same principles it ran on 30 years ago. It is simply larger. The artist who performs at a Live Nation venue receives 12 to 15% of gross ticket revenue. The company that owns the venue, promotes the show, manages the artist, and sells. The ticket collects the remainder across multiple categories simultaneously. The independent venue that could have offered the artist a more favorable split closed during the pandemic. Without the financial backing to survive 18 months of zero revenue. The consumer who buys the ticket sees the face value in the advertisement and the total cost at checkout. The gap between those two numbers is the business model. This is not a story about a corporation that charges too much for a service. Corporations charge what their market position allows. That is the mechanism, not the anomaly. This is a story about what happens when a market's competitive structure is removed. The government that removed it fails to enforce the conditions it attached. And the resulting infrastructure becomes too embedded to dislodge through the same regulatory process that allowed it to form. In a market where one company owns the stage, manages the artist, and sells the only available ticket, the concept of consumer choice is a description of something that does not exist. You can choose to attend or not attend. You cannot choose the terms under which your attendance is facilitated. Those were decided in a merger approval in 2010 and in the regulatory failures of the 14 years that followed. The next time someone asks why concert tickets cost what they do, you now have the full answer. It is not inflation. It is not artist greed. It is a vertically integrated monopoly approved by the federal government in 2010. That extracts rent from the artist through contract terms, from the venue through exclusivity agreements, and from you through a fee that appears only after you have already decided to buy. 3 populations paying rent to the same infrastructure. That is the machine. That is what 14 years of regulatory failure looks like when it gets dressed up as a service charge. The DOJ lawsuit will resolve in a courtroom on a timeline measured in years. What it will not resolve is the question of how many times the same structure can be allowed to form before the process of allowing and dismantling it becomes more expensive than preventing it. That is not a complaint. That is a market structure. And market structures, unlike complaints, require more than a Senate hearing to change. The next part of this investigation goes deeper into how that structure was built and who built it. It is already waiting for you.